Okay, so La Jolla, the jewel right there on the coast of San Diego, is talking about independence. They're talking about breaking away from the city of San Diego, and I think this is just a really interesting topic for a lot of different angles to this. Now, first of all, when I moved to San Diego, it was in 1982, and I was a student at UC San Diego, which, by the way, we were in La Jolla, and in fact, our address was La Jolla, California, 92037. I had always assumed that La Jolla was its own city, not only by the fact that we had our own address that said La Jolla, California, but on top of that, La Jolla is a pretty famous place and everyone kind of knows what La Jolla is, or many people do. And so it was just a natural assumption that I thought it was already a city. And then, as I learned more about San Diego and all these different neighborhoods, Pacific Beach, Ocean Beach, Mission Valley, um, Tierra Santa, Claremont, University City, Mira Mesa. Normally, in a lot of other parts of the world, you would think of those also as individual cities, but they're not. It's all part of this giant geomass of a city of San Diego, which geographically has got to be one of the larger cities in America, or if not in California. It's enormous from a geographic perspective. And then, I kind of figured it out eventually, that each one of these neighborhoods in San Diego kind of had their own zip code. La Jolla was 92037, and then Pacific Beach was 92109, and Mission Valley was 92108. And you start to kind of figure these things out. And then what was also interesting, because I'm kind of a zip code freak, I've learned all these things just being in the world of direct marketing, that all the city of San Diego zip codes start with 921. If you are in a 920 zip code, like I'm in Poway, 92064, that's outside the county. And then there are some zip codes here in San Diego County that start with 919. They're typically in the South Bay or way the heck out in the extreme East County area. And those aren't San Diego either. Every zip code that starts with 921 is in San Diego, but there are two exceptions: La Jolla, which is 92037, and Coronado, which is 92118. And Coronado is not part of San Diego. So again, when I'm coming from the Bay Area, I try to explain this to my parents, because it was confusing to them. And I said, it's kind of like in San Francisco, where there's a Richmond district, there's a Sunset district. There are all these neighborhoods in a big city of San Francisco. And then, oh, by the way, I think most of them have kind of their own zip codes. But at any rate, that kind of started to make a little bit more sense. But it just seems that each of these neighborhoods in San Diego have a much, how should I say, their identity is a lot stronger than a lot of those neighborhoods in San Francisco, and the way they're partitioned and everything. I just find the whole thing fascinating. So why does La Jolla want independence? Why do they want to break away from San Diego? Why do they want to secede? And I think apparently this has been going on for a very long time. Apparently, La Jolla has gone through multiple iterations of trying to break away. And it's on one level, you kind of makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of wealth, obviously, in La Jolla. There's a lot of tourist attractions in La Jolla. La Jolla is very different than a lot of the other communities in San Diego. And I would imagine that a lot of the movers and shakers in La Jolla, a lot of the old money in La Jolla, probably take a lot of pride in being La Jollans, and therefore want to have their own city. So they're not mixed up with the riffraff of the rest of San Diego. I'm sure that's a driving reason. I haven't heard someone articulate it that way. Of course, they're trying to spin it by saying, oh, it's actually better for San Diego that we break apart. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, the property tax income from La Jolla has got to be enormous. But, I'd imagine also that the people in La Jolla want to be able to have greater control over their local community and their local resources and public facilities. So that makes sense on that level. But I think we're going to learn more about it. Now, the story is that this effort, this time, they're a lot more organized. And this is more than just kind of fleeting talk, that there's actually a serious effort in La Jolla to do this. What do I think? I have sort of mixed feelings about it. Of course, this podcast is all about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And frankly, if you're declaring independence, that's liberty. So on one level, I kind of like this idea of La Jolla breaking away and becoming their own thing, because then they'll have, like I said, more control over what happens in their city. Now, here I live in the city of Poway, and Poway is its own legit city, and it has a city council, and we have local officials that can make decisions about what goes on in Poway. And that's powerful. I mean, Poway was unincorporated and became a city in 1980. But our neighbors next door in Rancho Bernardo and our other neighbors in Rancho Penasquitos, they're part of San Diego. And they do not have direct control over their neighborhoods. They have a lot of committees, advisory committees, and planning boards, and they ultimately make recommendations to the city of San Diego. And then the city of San Diego makes the decisions. And a lot of times their wants, needs, and desires are not listened to. Well, frankly, that happens in a city where you have representation, like here in Poway. There are a lot of people that argue the same thing. Their wants, needs, and desires are not being listened to either. But it does make sense at that level that you want to be able to have local control. I get that. I mean, frankly, that's why the United States was created, is to have self-rule and to have independence from England, and so we can manage our own affairs on this side of the Atlantic. So, how does this work? I mean, how do you declare independence? I mean, they don't have a civil war. You don't just plant a flag and say we're independent. There's a process for this, and apparently, a formal proposal has to be submitted to the San Diego Local Agency Formation Commission, which helps communities become incorporated. And that petition supporting incorporation has to be signed by at least 25% of the local registered voters. So they've got to get 25% of the people in La Jolla to agree to this, just to have it considered. Okay, that kind of makes sense. I mean, you don't want to have like a 2% of La Jolla, basically speaking for the other 98 and getting this secession. You want to have a significant mass, a critical mass of people that want to support this. And this is just to get it to be officially considered. Then it has to go to an organization called LAFCO, LAFCO. And I wish I would have written down what those initials are for. But apparently this is a California commission that they've created a process for cities to break away. So there's a standardized methodology of doing it. So they have to approve it. And then this is the key part here that I think is pretty tricky, is that the public in La Jolla have to have a majority vote to secede, which you would expect. But the majority of San Diego also has to vote to let La Jolla leave. So, and apparently that's always the sticking point, that, this LAFCO regulatory body that sort of manages these things. Apparently there hasn't been any secessions in the last 40 years in California since they set up this process, mostly because the bigger, older city doesn't want to vote to let the little guy break away. I mean, the little guy wants to break away. They could probably get the votes, but the big city doesn't. And honestly, I don't think San Diego, if they had their druthers, would vote to let La Jolla go. Because they know there's so much tax revenue that comes from La Jolla, I mean, property tax specifically. And, I mean, people take pride in La Jolla as being part of San Diego as well. I mean, heck, I live in Poway and I like to visit La Jolla from time to time, and it is truly a remarkable location. Not a city. It's not a city yet. But will that happen? I can see La Jollans voting to secede, but can you see San Diegans voting to allow it to happen? See, I don't. I think that's going to be a very difficult ask. Now, let's talk a little more broadly about this whole concept because first of all, we've seen other cities like Poway incorporate, and that's a lot easier. Like if you are not a city, if you're just sort of a town that's in the unincorporated land that's managed by the county, a town like Ramona, a town like Julian, a town like Pine Valley, these are all unincorporated parts of San Diego County, which by the way also happen to have their own zip codes. Um, and they are ultimately managed by the county board of supervisors. The sheriff is what polices those areas rather than having their own city police. And some of those towns have voted to incorporate, like Poway did in 1980. There, you don't need to get approval from the county to do it. At least a majority of the county to vote to let you incorporate. Just the people in that town can vote and they can break away. And Poway did that. And in fact, Lemon Grove did that, but now Lemon Grove is going through so many financial challenges, they're considering folding back into the city of San Diego because of sales tax revenue and property tax revenue. They just can't keep it up. They can't keep the city municipality going from a financial perspective. So keep an eye on that one. But think even more broadly about this, because this is a topic that's being discussed nationally. Have you heard this concept about a national divorce? I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene was just talking about this, the wackadoodle congresswoman from Georgia. And there's a lot of movement in this category. And it was originally, there was chirping about it from our right-wing friends, but now you're hearing our left-wing friends saying, yeah, let's do it. And essentially saying that America is too divided. We got red states and blue states. We got Republicans and Democrats, and there is this culture war. And there's this disagreement about how to manage society. And there's disagreement about what the function and role of government should be. So the United States should break apart. The United States should become multiple nations. What do you think of that idea? And by the way, we'll take your thoughts and comments on the live stream. To me, it's like a fantasy idea. Because how would you split up the nation? I mean, especially given that the more Democratic states are on the coasts and the more Republican states, generally speaking, are in the middle of the country. You would have a geographically non-contiguous nation for whoever the Democrats were able to hang on to. And could you even have a breaking apart in a way that wasn't just so utterly massively chaotic and certainly didn't involve a war? That's why some people call it a divorce rather than a civil war, because they think, we could just split up. Now, what's interesting is, and going back to La Jolla, in California, we have this thing called no-fault divorce, where a person can declare divorce or file for divorce, and you don't need the other party to agree to it. But in the case of La Jolla and divorcing from San Diego, you would need both sides to agree to it. So I think the whole thing is interesting. Now, speaking for myself, as an independent voter, if America split in two, where would I go? Would I stay in a blue state? Would I go to a red state? And then how difficult would it be to move around America if America was divided? Something tells me that the red states would probably build a wall, just like they want a wall on the southern border. Frankly, the Democrats, Biden is expanding the border wall right now. Maybe the Democrats would build walls around their blue states. Yeah, I'm curious to see how this goes. Oh, and by the way, have you ever seen the movie, The Man in the High Castle on Amazon Prime? It's not a movie, it's a series. And it's really, really good. And and this is kind of along these same ideas. It's about an alternative reality after World War II where America loses and the Germans take over the eastern portion of the United States. and the Japanese take over the western portion of the United States, and there's a little bit of a neutral zone somewhere around Colorado. Um, and uh, and that's how they split it up. And then apparently there were Americans that were trying to rebuild America and get the other guys out and kind of rejoin all the 50 states. Well, maybe back then there was only 48. But I just think a lot of this is interesting. Now, one of the things that I think is really great about, let's just take for example the European Union, where they have obviously a wide array of different nations, but they all kind of function with similar rules. They have similar money. You can drive your car through from nation to nation to nation without having to go through border checkpoints and visas and all of that. They make travel easy. They make business easy. I like that. To me, that's a very valuable thing. But if America split up, I'm not so sure it would be that easy. My sense is that the blue states would want to sanction the red states because of their violations on the environment or on labor, and there'll be sanctions and blockades, and the red states are going to probably want to build walls to keep the blue people from coming into the red states. So now, thankfully, at the local level in La Jolla, we won't have any of that. And that's a good thing, because traveling among cities should be easy. I wish we had the same thing here, frankly, in North America. I would like to see, a more easy flow of people, of information, of business through across these borders from US to Canada, US to Mexico, and so on. I think we'd be a lot better off. And then we would honestly be supporting these ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not just for us, but for everybody else too. Um, but this whole thing is obviously been a big part of what's happened around the world and in human history. There's always this balkanization, countries that want to break apart. I mean, Czechoslovakia was split into two. Yugoslavia has been split up in pieces. Now in the UK, the Scots want to break apart. Again, I have mixed feelings about this because on one level, I support their desire for independence and local control. But on the other hand, when you have this sort of balkanization, especially when it's tribal, especially when it's based on ethnicity, hey, we want a nation for our tribe, and you can have your nation for your tribe. That to me is, I think, more negative than positive, because it just reinforces divisiveness. It reinforces, us versus them, and it reinforces conflict. I mean, and that's one of the proposals being discussed, obviously, in Israel, right, of a two-state solution. And on one level, you think that would be good; it would provide peace. Hopefully, both sides would get what they need. But in the end, I don't know if that's necessarily a solution there either, because both sides really want all of it. So at any rate, I just find this whole topic of La Jolla having independence to me to be very fascinating. I'm curious to see where this goes. My hunch is it won't happen because it's too difficult to get it to happen. There would have to be some breaking news would have to occur in La Jolla that the San Diegans would vote to say good riddance. And I don't think they're prepared to do that, but we'll find out for sure.